The Civil War in 1861 meant great prosperity for Falls Village and surrounding towns. This area was rich with iron ore and the limestone, hardwood forests, and water power essential for making products from iron ore, such as cannons, cannonballs, artillery, heavy iron castings, and wheels for railroad cars. Falls Village banks prospered too. By 1869, 4 years after the Civil War ended, the Falls Village Savings Bank had become too large to share the same building as the National Iron Bank and built its own bank building across the road on Main Street. Today, the Falls Village Savings Bank belongs to Dr. Michael Klemens, who runs it as a very nice gift shop he calls Mid-Century and More.
My former partner and I loved the building and wanted to buy it years ago. And at that time, the owner was not interested in selling or selling for a fortune. So now, basically, he got to the point where he needed to sell it, and I approached him and worked the deal and bought it. With all the problems it had. It had not been heated, so it was, the walls were problematic, paint peeling and that, so the rugs in here were moldy. So we had to take up the rugs, we had to restore the floors, had to look at the floors there, that very narrow, that had to be custom milled, because there were lots of holes in the floor from other heating systems. So when I pulled up the rug, I was shocked to see basically there were holes because they had a couple different heating systems in here that covered it with a rug. So we had to do a lot of milling to get in there. Then I saw they had sort of very unconventional grates, sort of modern grates from the bank that owned it. I found these grates on eBay, a pair of them, and we redid the floor to accommodate the grates. They were sort of modern looking grates, like you have in a modern house. Because this was owned by the bank. The Iron Bank owned this. Then they sold it to Mr. Rosbecki. And right over here, if you go to the Iron Bank in Lakeville, go down there, you will find the counter that used to stretch here, from here to here, was the counter. Had a marble top, it had grill and all that. So that's still there. Should ask them to give it back to me, but I don't think they will. And the basement was very wet. We had to sort of fix that up, put gutters on. The upstairs had to be redone and floored with maple flooring. You can go up there and take a look. It's like a loft. It's just beautiful. The building is beautiful. And most recently I had hail damage. The skylights upstairs got broken by the hailstorm we had a few weeks ago. So, that's the history. It's a beautiful building. The vault is amazing. The vault is, it's a vault within a vault within a vault. And if you go upstairs, it's a huge vault, which is my closet there. If you go upstairs to the second floor, Eric, you will see what looks like a stage upstairs. People say, why is there a stage upstairs? It's because basically the vault is so big, encrusted with concrete, that it protrudes into the attic. So let me go and... That chair is half price today if you're interested in it.
Okay.
That Equornis, that's a Swedish Equornis chair. What is it? It's $250 today, plus I have to charge tax unless you're a dealer.
Okay.
You sit in it, it's very comfy.
Have a seat.
You can lean back a bit, and should let, no. What is it? Push back.
Oh.
Oh, that's neat. Huh. The Swedes, they know how to live. That's all Scandinavian design. And you know what you can do when you get to a point where you're comfortable, you turn those wheels on the side and you can hold it.
Hold a lock position.
Lock position. That's the cornice. It's bent wood, real leather. It's very comfortable. It's called stressless. It's supposed to get rid of your stress.
Oh, I can feel it working already.
Really? Now you're getting on a video of Falls Village. You're being videoed. You don't
Oh,
mind.
wonderful. Not at all.
History of
Hello.
This is Eric. He's doing a video of the history of the building and how it's being adaptively reused.
It's a beautiful building.
Yeah.
Beautiful. As they say, they don't build them like this anymore.
They don't survive the fire. There was a fire in 1907 in Falls Village that took out this building and took out that building. Because this building was primarily brick, most of it survived.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Nice.
1885, this building.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
So what I do now is now you're really stressed.
Look at that.
Don't get your head on the wall.
Okay.
So what I do is I do my work, my research here. I'm the consultant. The office is here. Upstairs is a studio, and the front is a shop. So it's a multiple use here. And the shop is a challenge to get people to come to Falls Village because it's quiet.
Right. Like
And we hope eventually, I hear from the first selectman that building is sold, and there's supposed to be 2 businesses coming in. So maybe we're eventually going to get a revitalized Main Street here in Falls Village, which would be good for business, good for me, good for everybody.
Wonderful.
It's a lovely town.
I like the purple too, Ken.
We like to call it aubergine, it sounds classy. Eric, if you want to go upstairs, you can go upstairs and take a look.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, I just need to stay down here in the store. Would you look?
Okay.
We'll look around, we'll look around.
That's nice. Oh, it is?
Be less, but it'll be tax on that because it's a store item. Unfortunately, I can't do anything about that. I have to give the state what they need. Cannot. Not. Give the state what the state needs.
Are you taking a movie?
Yeah, for the Falls Village Library. You've got a great smile. I hope you don't mind being photographed. You both do.
Don't scare my customers away, Eric.
No, I'm keeping my distance.
Now, not everyone likes to be videoed. And definitely the plates, definitely I'm looking to sell the plates. So
Okay.
I'm very negotiable on the plate sets.
Okay,
Much more than we've seen there.
okay, thank you. Yeah, I love little dishes. Sweet.
What, honey?
Step right.
Okay.
Just in the doorway. Yeah, it must have been I thought it was maybe not. Maybe not. Yeah, I don't know, you're right, now that I see it, yeah, I think so.
Keeps the moving.
It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Some Steve's chair over there?
Yeah, glad to see
This chair.
you.
I want to purple.
$23.
That's so cool.
It's a beautiful building, isn't it?
1375. more of it out on the porch. That's Chinese export porcelain, probably Lake Victorian.
Luckily, we're close by, we're only in Goshen.
Right, because today, after today, it's back to 55 again.
Okay,
It's 55 plus tax after today.
okay.
It's just 25% off today only.
Okay, okay. All right, I think that's fair. Thank you.
Sure,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
Glad we got that other piece for you, honey.
Good, Bruce.
All this stuff now to find.
I'm ready. I know you've been ready for months. I apologize, I'm so hard to pin down.
Well, you do a lot of traveling for your work, don't you?
Do a lot of traveling for my work, a lot of traveling in my personal life. Anyway, Eric, it's nice to be here. I'm glad we finally pinned me down to come back in and finish this interview. Because it gives me a chance to actually tell people who I am and what I do and how I came to Falls Village, and maybe have them a chance to understand that I'm more than the guy that owns the bank building and has a part-time antique shop in the bank building. I mean, as you know, I'm an environmental scientist, and I've had a very interesting career, and I would say I shouldn't say it in the past tense because I still think that I have a career. I was born in Australia, which most people don't realize. I came here with my parents as a young child. My father worked for the Australian government, and my parents actually emigrated to Australia from Europe after the war, World War II. They were all survivors of the Holocaust. So they started a new life in Australia because it was a place that welcomed people. Anyway, I came to this country in '59 and I grew up in Pittsburgh. And my father got a job at the University of Connecticut. Boy, I got to think about timing here, in the '60s. We moved from Pittsburgh to Connecticut. He got a job at the University of Connecticut. He was a physicist, and he eventually was the chairman of the physics department at UConn. And I always had a passion for being in the outdoors. And I guess it was back then, and maybe it's not as much of a problem here in Falls Village or in Salisbury, but certainly in many places, parents don't want their kids to go off into the woods and explore and be by themselves. Back then, when growing up in Manchester, Connecticut, and in stores, people didn't have those worries. We didn't have the internet, we didn't have a lot of TV. As a matter of fact, as a sidebar, I never saw a television program till I came to this country till I was 13 or 14. So I actually saw a TV program. So I had a childhood without television, and I don't miss it. Anyway, that's an aside. I had the ability to go to explore the woods, to find turtles, to learn about frogs, to catch hognose snakes, and find box turtles and wood turtles, and that stayed with me my whole life. I mean, I started off like so many kids, just keeping these animals, studying them. I took some out of the wild, things that I wouldn't do now, but I learned. And by 1975, I went to the University of Connecticut, and I decided I had a big interest in history. And that's important because my work today is an amalgamation of history, landscape, people, and everything all together. So I've always been sort of interdisciplinary in my approach. And I say it was interdisciplinary before we even talked about interdisciplinary. So in 1975, I went to the University of Connecticut to get a teaching degree in history. I wanted to be a history teacher. I loved history, particularly colonial history, American history. So I got my teaching degree, and then a colleague of mine, who was a professor at UConn, said, "Why are you why are you going into teaching colonial history? Why are you a history teacher? You love amphibians and reptiles, you're mad about them, you're passionate about them, you should do that. And I said, well, I didn't think I was smart enough to do that. And some people had said to me I didn't have the skills to do scientist, so it sort of stuck with me. And I think that's an important lesson for anyone. When you tell a young person that they're not capable of doing something, it can have a major effect. And it basically pushed me into having a career in history. But this gentleman, who is still alive, said, you need to go back and study zoology. You have, it's your passion. So I did, and after I got my bachelor's in teaching at UConn, teaching education history, I went back and got my master's in zoology. So my subject of interest was basically painted turtles, which are a very common species we have here in the northwest corner. It's the one we see on the logs, basking in the spring. But they're very common all over the state. But what many people may not know is that they vary tremendously across the state. The ones we have here in the northwest corner, the shell scutes on the top tend to be disaligned, and they tend to have a patterning on the bottom, on the undershell. And that's indicative of basically Midwestern gene pool. The further east you go, the more you have the scutes aligned and a clear plaster on our lower shell. So I traveled the whole state, trapping, live trapping, marking, photographing, drawing these turtles for my dissertation. And I was able to reconstruct how these two gene pools of turtles came into Connecticut at the end of the last glaciation, the Pleistocene glaciation, 12,000 years ago. Basically, we had one whole group of turtles they're both the same species, but the ones that came up the Atlantic coastal plain into the coast and eastern Connecticut, and then we had those that came from the Midwest into northwest Connecticut, western Connecticut. They came as the glacier receded, they came across these sort of wetlands that were formed and entered Connecticut. So we had painted turtles coming in from two different gene sources 12,000 years ago, and that was reflected in the ratios of different patterns in the state. I looked at many different areas in the state, and why this is important to me is it developed a real love for the state, for understanding, though Connecticut was an incredibly small state, you can drive across it in 2 hours. You can drive north to south in an hour and 10 minutes. But within that tiny state, there was incredible diversity of habitats. People outside Connecticut, they think Connecticut, you just drive through Connecticut, they see the urban sprawl and that's it. But I saw Connecticut as an area of incredible ecological diversity, packed into a very, very small area, and really unappreciated in that regard. So that was really the foundations when I began to really, really understand how diverse the state was. It also, as an aside, was the time that brought me into, when I was doing this work, really into the northwest corner, and sort of started to get a real love for this area. I mean, there was, to me, just incredibly beautiful. I mean, and I sampled many painted turtle populations in Sharon and in Salisbury and in Robin Swamp. And coincidentally, when I was in Robin Swamp, those of you old-timers may remember that there was a period of time the railroad was abandoned, and you could walk on those railroad tracks right into the heart of Robin Swamp. And there was this huge old abandoned processing plant on Sand Road, huge, and it was all falling apart. And I went into that area as one of my friends and started turning over rocks and rocks and logs and railroad ties and garbage. And I found a blue-spotted salamander. That actually was the first time blue-spotted salamanders were actually been reported from Connecticut. And that got published in Herpetologica, take that back, Journal of Herpetology in 1978. That was Connecticut's first report of the blue-spotted salamander in the state, here in Robin Swamp in town of Canaan. So I got my master's degree in '78 from UConn, and I went immediately on an NSF grant to the University of Michigan. Got a job there at the Museum of Zoology there. But I always wanted, in the back of my mind, I wanted to come back to Connecticut to basically study. I was so intrigued by the diversity of the painted turtles that I said I really need to find out what else can I study in Connecticut. I mean, this is so interesting. Small area, everyone just dismisses it as inconsequential, and yet with a very common species, I saw incredible variability across the state. So what else is waiting to be discovered? And in 1979, a friend of mine who had just gotten a job at the Museum of Natural History told me there's a job opening, very low-level job opening in the herpetology department at the Museum of Natural History in New York City. So I thought, boy, wouldn't this be a wonderful way to get back east, to maybe be able to study Connecticut in greater detail. So I went and I interviewed, and I remember going into the museum, and that's an incredible institution. People don't realize, they see the exhibits, they don't realize that they have research collections going back 100 years, thousands upon thousands, millions of insects. Right now they have about 500,000 preserved amphibians and reptiles, and it's a major repository of biodiversity. So I went there, and I remember just an anecdote, it's the beginning of my career, and I went into the personnel department. They brought me in, I interviewed, went back to Michigan, they came back again and said, well, we'd like to offer you the job. And I remember the woman in personnel saying, yeah, we're going to offer you the job, it's going to be like this amount of salary, and that's not enough salary to live in New York City or anywhere nearby. It's not a living wage. So I was naive then. I was young, and I said, well, why? Why aren't you paying people a living wage? Because she looked at me and said, if you don't take this job, there are 150 other applicants who want to work here. And I said, I'm going to take it. And it was a struggle for many years to make ends meet, because they paid very poorly. But on my vacations and my weekends, I started exploring Connecticut and trying to understand it. Every weekend I went out into the field, and on my vacation I went out in the field. And I even found out that they get a program that if you gave blood, they gave you half a day off. So I was able to give blood, I think 6 or 8 times a year, and I got 3 or 4 more field days. So I always joke that I paid for this in blood. Anyway, life is a fascinating way of just opportunities come if you work hard. And so I was plugging away at this for many, many years. And I worked at the museum. I started in '79, and I spent the '80s really working there during the week and spending every free moment I had exploring Connecticut, exploring the hills, the valleys, discovering species that are, starting to understand the distribution and the abundance of these species. And I was in the museum when we had a visitor from England. There's a gentleman who was named Professor Ian Swingland, and he was tied in with Gerald Durrell from, the famous writer. And they were setting up a conservation institute at the University of Kent. And he was actually going around the world headhunting people that he thought would make wonderful, what they call postgraduate students. We call them graduate students in England, they call them postgraduate. And he invited me to come and study, take all the work that I had been doing just for the joy of doing it and to write a book. And he said that he would like to offer me a position there at the university as a postgraduate student because he felt what I was doing was actually very, very important and could be converted from just a descriptive analysis to a really to enough robustness to be a doctorate and to create my doctoral dissertation. And I, after some thinking, accepted it. I took a leave of absence from the museum. It wasn't easy because the people in my department fought me. They didn't want me to leave. They always thought, well, you took this job. You never said you were going to go and get a doctorate. And I applied for it and I was denied, but I sort of went up to the director of the museum and I said, I really want to have, a 6-month leave of absence to do this. And he said, you're asking for a 6-month leave of absence with pay. And I said, no, I don't want to be paid. I want a 6-month leave of absence. He looked backwards. You want a 6-month leave of absence without pay to do this work? And they're denying you that? And I said, yes. And he said, do you need any more time than 6 months to get this work done? I got my leave, got my doctorate. And that's really when my life, I came back to the museum, and the museum was so gracious to me. After the people that had stood in my way of going actually welcomed me back, I started working on a lot of projects at the museum which dealt with we were just becoming aware of the biodiversity, the loss of biodiversity. The biodiversity crisis, as we call it, was just beginning to be recognized. Conventionally, we thought, okay, we know what a development is. And what my work began to show was that you have development, which we all know what development looks like, but the effects of development move far into the ecosystem and is reflected in the composition of fauna. And that was sort of the beginning of conservation. Conservation biology was just starting. People were just beginning to grapple with the effects of understanding the science and understanding the impact analysis. And I kind of, by 1994, I realized I'd gone as far as I could go in conservation at the museum, and I really wanted a larger stage. And I was offered a job at the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is the Bronx Zoo. They also have a big international field program. And in 1994, I left the museum employment and joined the Wildlife Conservation Society in the Bronx because I wanted to do a lot more with science than just record. I wanted to take the science and do something with it. If there was a problem, I felt we needed to address it, and that was why I felt I was better able to do it at an organization whose mission was science and conservation rather than an organization which was just science. And I should say that I left the museum on very, very good terms. And I'm still on the staff of the museum, 30 or 25 years later. I'm still a research associate in this very department of herpetology where I started out in 1979. It's now almost 2019, so yes, I would say I'm terrible with math, it's at least 40 years later, I'm still on the staff, still in that same section of the museum that I started off my career in, and still contributing, because I'm still doing biodiversity related work and specimen collection that ends up at the museum. So it was very exciting going to the Wildlife Conservation Society, because here people were talking about, okay, we have science and we have conservation problems. And one of the first things was I had a period of time where I had an opportunity to work overseas. And that was, apart from being fascinating and exotic and everything else, gave me a chance to sort of understand how other countries were doing conservation. I received several grants from the MacArthur Foundation, primarily worked in East Africa and Tanzania. I also did some work in Chad, in the Sahara, but I also traveled to a lot of countries for the Wildlife Conservation Society. I went to South America, I went to India, saw a lot of the world through a conservation eye. I mean, the whole issue of the ecological, what I call the term the ecological footprint. People don't understand that a development can have an impact that stretches many orders of magnitude larger than the footprint of the building is the impact zone. So you have to really educate people in a constructive and positive way, and then bring them to understand that there are different and better ways to do things. And that's sort of what I do. I do that in many different venues right now. And that's the consulting office in the back room of the bank building, which is really why I bought the bank building. It was really my office for my consulting science business. Upstairs I have archives. The little front room where I sell things is really a sideline. But really what I do is trying to take, how do we take scientific information, get it into the hands of people that can make better decisions. So to do that, I work for various different groups, very diverse group of people that I'm working with. I mean, one of the nice things about not working for any one institution is you can pick and choose who you work with. You can see where the problems are, where you want to put your resources, just my resources being my time. Which, as you know, trying to pin me down to come and talk, I don't have a lot of time. I'm always on the go. But some of the things I do, I'm chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission in the town of Salisbury, because although I have an office in Falls Village, my house is just across the bridge, so I'm a Salisbury resident, not a Falls Village resident. Though geographically, I'm much more aligned with Falls Village. It's the closest metropolis to where I live, if you want to call it that. And I feel a very strong kinship to Falls Village. I think it's a wonderful community with very interesting, they're more the kind of people, interesting, artistic, and environmentally grounded. You can't make broad generalizations about any community, but I think the people in Falls Village are very much rooted to the earth and down to earth people, and they value and understand intuitively the wonderful environment that they live in. The challenge is to build upon that appreciation and reflect it in what we do. Because we can all say we love this environment, we're blessed with living in a wonderful place, but how do we protect it? That's often, we want to protect it, but we often don't know how to protect it or how best to protect it.
Can I ask a naive question? How does reptile and amphibian wildlife affect people?
Well, that's a great question, actually. You know, I have the parable, this is so that the reverse is, who cares? And you're right, I mean, would the world be worse off if we didn't have bog turtles and all these turtles? Probably not. But I'll give you two things to think about. Firstly, for better or for worse, amphibians and reptiles are among the most ecologically sensitive groups we have. They make up the highest proportion. If you take the proportion of species, the highest percentages of species on endangered and threatened species lists across the country, amphibians and reptiles, is because they're very sensitive, they have poor mobility, the amphibians have sort of a biphasic life cycle, land and water. They're among the first. They are in fact the canary in the mine shaft. If we start to lose our amphibians and reptiles, what does it mean about the quality of our environment? So I think they're excellent indicators of the health of a place. Robust amphibian and diverse amphibian and reptile populations speak to an interconnected habitat, where mosaic, where animals can move, where the water is clean, where there are connections between uplands and wetlands. The second part is, and this goes right back to E.O. Wilson. I believe it was E.O. Wilson, maybe not E.O. Wilson. It was Ehrenfeld. One of the conservation biologists have likened all these species to rivets holding a plane. And you can have a plane flying, and you can pop a rivet here and pop a rivet there. Sooner or later, the plane is going to fall apart. I don't know how many species we have to lose to have the plane fall apart. But I'm a firm believer in the precautionary principle. As Aldo Leopold said, the first step to intelligent tinkering is to keep all the pieces. Sand County Almanac. So I believe, I don't want to be the person to figure out how few species we need to get by. I subscribe to the precautionary principle that we need to protect and save as much as we can for future generations, for future sustainability, for the health of the planet. So that's my approach, is we need to do the most we can to save the most we can, because who's to know also what lies in a species yet untapped. More and more of our pharmaceuticals they come from nature. Many of our amphibians have pharmacologically active skins.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure, the poison dart frogs in Central America, they have incredible neurotransmitter end plate disruptors. They are very, very valuable in pain medications. Many snake venoms in small amounts have tremendous potential as painkillers, particularly the neurotoxic venoms. We do not know what lies in nature's storehouse that may benefit us, what new drug, what new treatment lies in a plant or an animal. All I know is if that plant or animal is gone, that opportunity is foreclosed for us as humans. We need to keep as much as possible and as healthy as possible, for their sake as well as ours. Really, for our sake more.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for being so incredibly persistent in getting me to sit down with you.
It was worth it.
Well, thank you, sir. I hope so.